Well, welcome everybody to Downtown Harbor Church. If it's your first time here, my name is John. I'm lead pastor. Appreciate you guys coming on out. We are in week 3 of this 4-week series. We're wrapping it up next week that we're calling the Big Ten. And what we've been doing is just a deep dive into the greatest set of rules the world has ever seen. Rules that at times, we saw this last week, we have misunderstood and sometimes even misapplied. What I want to do today is I want to turn our attention to the 4th commandment. So let me say some opening remarks about the 4th commandment. Number 1, it is the longest commandment of the entire bunch. It has a bunch of just sort of subsections, and we're going to kind of quickly work through those. But secondly, the 4th commandment comes with a big surprise. Something that many of you, most of you, maybe even all of you, aren't going to see coming, and it's a surprise that is going to definitely throw a curveball into today. So let's jump in and see what we see. So here is the 4th commandment. God says, remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. All right, there it is. But this is really more of a chapter heading because God is about to go into some much greater detail. He continues. He says, you have 6 days each week for your ordinary work. But on the 7th day, the Sabbath day of rest, dedicated to the Lord your God. He continues, on that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you. All right, you with me so far? Work 6 days. Everybody, including the chickens and the goats, does nothing on the 7th day. All right. What they're going to say next is going to be a problem for some of you. You're not going to like it. Okay, you're going to hear it, and you're going to go, no. That did not happen. I don't agree with that. I don't believe that. No. Okay, here's what it says. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. Let's just pause real quick here. I am going to guess that the idea of God creating the world in 6 literal 24-hour days bothers many of you. Like you can't get your mind around that. You can't get behind that idea. And honestly, for as much as you may love God and love Jesus and even love the Bible, this is a sticking point for you, right? This is a problem for you. If that's you, just know you're not alone, right? You're not alone. And just in a bit, I'm going to show you some scripture that I think is going to help you with those doubts. So just for now, I want you to hold on to those doubts, right? Hold on. So scripture says, God worked for 6 days, but on the 7th day, he rested. All right. If you remember back to week 1, I don't know if you're with us or not, we talked about how you can learn a lot about a person based on the rules that they give. You can discern and discover what is important to that person and what matters to that person based on the rules that they give. And so God here, in giving us his most important rules, says, I want you to take a day off. Just like it's important to me, he would say, that I am your one and only God. Just like it's important to me that you do not take my name in vain, it is also important to me that you take a day off. I want you to work hard for 6 days, but on that 7th day, I'm commanding you, literally commanding you, to rest. It's almost like God is saying, I've designed you to function best when you take time to breathe, right? Because when you build into your schedule time to breathe, when you actually build into your schedule time to pause, time to reflect, time to be mindful, you'll appreciate life more. You will appreciate the other people in your life more, and you'll appreciate God more. And so that being the case, God would say, when the sun goes down on a Friday, I want you to stop working. I want you to lay down your tools, and for an entire 24-hour period, I want you to rest and reflect on the life I've given you. In a nutshell, this right here is the Sabbath, a built-in day of the week where you stop everything so that you can focus on God, so that you can reflect on who he is and what he's done for you. Okay, so top of the message, what did I say? 4th commandment comes with a surprise. You ready for the surprise? This is going to rock your world. Here it is. 4th commandment no longer applies to Christians. There are still 10 commandments, but the 4th commandment is the only commandment that no longer applies to Christians. In other words, you're still not allowed to murder anybody, which is a bummer, okay? Especially when you're dealing with slow drivers. But, you know what I mean? you can, right? You are allowed to skip this tradition of taking an entire day off of work. Why? To be honest with you, to answer that question properly would take an entire sermon series. But the long story short is that we now find our rest in Jesus, not the Sabbath. Let me kind of explain. And I'm going to give you a disclaimer before I explain. I'm going to do a poor job of explaining this to you, simply because of the time constraints of the day. Right? So if you're a little confused, when I'm done, it's not you, it's me. But I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest, sort of the cliff notes, remember those things were back in the days, of one of the most complex theological issues in all of Scripture. Here's what Jesus said. Matthew 11. Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart. And here it is. You will find rest for your souls. In other words, Jesus is saying, I am a better Sabbath. You will find better rest in me. You will find ultimate rest. Rest for your souls in me, not some day of the week. Now, the issue of Jesus and the Sabbath is found all over the New Testament. But I want to encourage you to read about it for yourselves. You don't have to take my word for it. And I would specifically point you to Hebrews chapter 4, verses 1 through 16. Go read this. Won't take you long. Read in the NLT version, so it's a little easier to understand. What you're going to see is the author of Hebrews is going to go into detail about temporary rest found in the Sabbath versus complete rest found in Jesus. And because we now have Jesus, and because we now find better rest in him, we no longer have to keep the Sabbath. Now, that was a little confusing for early Christians, particularly the ones that were Jewish converts, because, well, they had spent their whole lives keeping the Sabbath. Now they're not. And other Jews were seeing them do this, and they were kind of giving them slack for it. So Paul steps in and says, so do not let anyone make rules for you about eating and drinking, or about a religious feast, a new moon festival, here it is, or a Sabbath day. In other words, if you're a follower of Jesus, don't let anybody tell you that you must obey the Sabbath anymore. Why? He says, for these rules are only shadows of the reality yet to come. And Christ himself is that reality. In other words, the fourth commandment, the Sabbath, points to Jesus. And now that he's here, you're going to find your rest in him, not some day of the week. Okay. So this big surprise, this revelation, if you will, leads us to kind of a big question for the day, and that is, well, what do we do with the fourth commandment? I mean, it's a little awkward where this whole series is about the Ten Commandments, and if the fourth commandment no longer applies, do I just pray and we go home? You know what I mean? Do I just skip to the practical? I know you'd like that. Bunch of sin, right? No, nice try. So I looked at what other pastors were doing to sort of, how are they handling the fourth commandment if they're talking about it? And of course, they point out that we're no longer held to it. But then they would create what I'll call practices that you could begin to incorporate into our daily lives that would mimic the Sabbath. And they would encourage folks to pray and to read scripture and to reflect. All good things. You should be doing these things already. I, however, want to take this discussion in a slightly different direction. So what I did was I took a step back and I thought about what effect, right? Like if you're obeying and keeping the Sabbath, what effect the Sabbath might have on a person's perspective of their life, okay? And as I look at how God laid out the fourth commandment, creating this weekly drama almost of working 6 days and then resting one, then working 6 days and resting one, I believe, I'm going to argue, that it would have caused those early Jews to become mindful of the rhythm of life, to become mindful of how we live our lives, our days, and our weeks. So when it comes to this life that we're all living, time really is our most valuable asset. You can always get a new car, you can always go make more money, but you can never get more time. And our inclination as humans, for being honest, it really is to cram as much possible into the day and not take anything out, for that matter. And so life is crazy, and we're all so busy, and it's always, hey, I'm going to be 15 minutes late, just letting you know. Or, hey, I got to leave 15 minutes early, okay? Or we say to our kids, sweetie, What time exactly do you dance during the recital? Because I have to leave as soon as you're done. We drive fast, we choke down our food, at least I do. We're always answering emails and texts, and it just feels like life is just a frenzy. We're always overwhelmed, we're always overstimulated. It is non-stop. Life 3,500 years ago, during Moses' age, may have looked a little different, but it was the same thing. You got to remember, this is a culture that was living hand to mouth. If you didn't work yourself to the bone from sun up to sundown, you might not eat. Your family might not eat. So there's always been this nonstop craziness to life. And so with that in mind, what I want to do is I want to drill down on a concept that the fourth commandment forces us to evaluate. And that is our time. The time that we actually have in our weeks and in our lives and on this earth. So let's talk about Moses real quick. So Moses got the Ten Commandments from God at the age of 80. And for the next 40 years of his life, he lived out in that desert, working 6 days and resting one, and working 6 days and resting one. And over the course of those 40 years of being mindful of those days, he began to see life more clearly. And he began to see time differently. And he learned something about the rhythm of life. And he begins to learn something about his time and what to do with the time that he had in his life. And if we can begin to follow where Moses is going to lead us today, I think it can change how we live as well. So after years of being mindful of his days, Moses writes something incredible in Psalm 90. And that's what I want to show you today. Here's what he writes. Lord, you have been our home since the beginning. And this is such a powerful statement because you got to remember that at this point, they didn't have a physical home. They had been wandering aimlessly in that desert for 40 years. And so Moses is saying, God, we may not physically have a home, but our home is in you. You are our home. He continues. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. In other words, God, there has never been a time when you haven't existed. And there will never be a time when you don't exist. From everlasting to everlasting. From eternity past to eternity future, God exists. And somewhere between all of that comes us, comes me, comes you. Then Moses says something that is seemingly morbid. He says, you turn people into dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. Okay? A little dark, Moses, but this is Moses' way of saying that God has control and input into the days of our lives. Most of us, whether we recognize it or not, or whether we would articulate it or not, most of us believe that God has something to do with the length of our life. Here's how you know. If you found out that you had a terminal disease, would you pray? I mean, listen, I don't know where you are spiritually, but if you found out that someone you loved, a spouse, a parent, a sibling, God forbid a child, had a terminal disease, would you pray? And forget about the fact that maybe you haven't prayed in a long time. And forget about the fact that maybe you've not been to church in a long time. Isn't it true? Come on. Isn't it true? There's something inside of you that would say, God, please help. Because there's something inside all of us, whether we want to admit to it or not, that believes that God has something to do with the number of our days. Then Moses says something absolutely amazing. And honestly, if you're not paying attention, you're going to miss it. You're not going to see how incredibly eye-opening this is. Here's what he says. 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. Let's pause. Remember the fourth command said that the world was created in 6 days. And for many of you, that bothers you. It's a sticking point for you. That doesn't square with science for you. If that's you, then this verse right here is an absolute godsend. Because Moses is telling us that for God, 1,000 years, it's like a day. Why? because he exists on an eternal timeline. From everlasting to everlasting, he says, you are God. Moses says for God, 1,000 years is like a watch in the night. Do you know how long a watch is? 3 hours. Why is this so important? Because if you are someone who is troubled by the idea that the world was created in 6 literal 24-hour days, if that notion is keeping you from God, if that notion is causing you to doubt God or to doubt Scripture, just know that God's idea of a day is way bigger than our idea of a day. Moses sees that God has an entirely different perspective on time than we do. And it's almost like he's asking God, what does my life look like from your perspective? With how big you are, with how you see time and experience time, how does my life look? Because my life is so big to me. My problems, my worries, they look so big and so overwhelming from my perspective. But how does it look in the context of 1,000 years? Reminds me of a meme that I saw. You are here crying in the shower before work, right? Can you relate to this? In other words, God, give me a bigger perspective on my problems. God, am I concerned about the wrong stuff? Like, God, in the grand scheme of things, am I putting my time and my energy into the wrong things? In other words, Lord, from an eternal perspective, am I wasting my time? Because I feel like I'm running around like a chicken with its head cut off. And I'm so busy, and I'm so overwhelmed, and I'm so overstimulated. I'm allowing my life to be consumed by things that I'm telling myself are important, but at the same time, they are keeping me from things that are more important. Then Moses begins to share some internal struggles. And he's going to say something that I think is going to relate to a lot of you. He says, our lifetime is 70 years, or for a strong 80 years, but the years are full of hard work and pain. They pass quickly, and we're gone. It's like he's looking back over his life, and he goes, oh my gosh, it went so fast. Where'd the time go? James, who was the brother of Jesus, puts it like this. He says, how do you know what your life will be like tomorrow? Your life is like the morning fog. It's here a little while, then it's gone. When you look at what Moses is saying today, when you look at what James is saying, I really feel like, in my mind, these guys are challenging us to take a step back, to pause, to look at our lives and really ask, what am I doing with the time I was given? I mean, if it's true, and we know it is, that we have like 70, 80 years, we got a little more now because of medicine, thank God. If it's true that we're here today and gone tomorrow, then what am I doing with the time God has given me? And the truth is, while the 4th commandment no longer applies to Christians, it really isn't until God commands you to pause and to stop and to contemplate your days that you begin to realize what a precious gift time really is. Moses sees that now. So watch what he asks God. He says, God, teach us to number our days. Or to say it differently, he would say, teach us to live as if our days are numbered. Teach us, God, because we don't do this naturally, do we? Because naturally, what do? We spend our days as if we got all the time in the world. We spend our days like our kids will always live under our roof. Like we're always going to have time to show up for their sports or to show up for the recitals or to read them stories before bed. We spend our days like we're always going to have our spouse. Like we're always going to have time to tell them how much we love them. We spend our days like we're always going to have our parents to learn from, to laugh with, to find comfort in. We spend our days like we're always going to have our health. Truth is, we spend our days as if our time is unlimited. And we all know it's not. And yet when it comes to how we spend our days and how we schedule our lives and what we prioritize, and don't miss this, who we prioritize, we live and we act as though our days are not numbered. Moses would say, it's a huge mistake. Huge mistake. You need to learn to number your days. You need to learn to make the most of the time that you have now. And you've done this before in other areas of your life. You think back to college, okay? Remember that final exam? You made the most of every day leading up to that exam. You would schedule your days so you have the proper time to do everything you needed to do to be successful on that test. Remember your wedding? Okay? You would count the days leading up to that wedding because you had to make sure you got everything done in time. When we realize that we have limited time, when we know and recognize and grasp that a time period is going to come to an end, you act accordingly. And you really do live differently. So Moses asks God, he says, please teach us to number our days. Why? Why? That we may gain a heart of wisdom. In other words, give us the wisdom, Lord, to know what we should prioritize with the limited time we've been given. Because if we are unwise, right? If we're unwise with the time we've been given, if we continue to live our life as if our days are not numbered, we will continue to fill our days with things we wish we had not. But when you learn to number your days, when you learn that time is in fact fleeting, when you learn that you do not have all the time in the world, you will then gain the wisdom to say, I need to spend more time doing this. I need to spend less time doing this. And I need to spend no time doing that. To borrow a phrase that we used in our baby dedication just a few weeks ago, when you see the time you have left, you get more serious about the time you have now. And here's the kicker. And James pointed this out earlier. None of us know how much time we have left. So what I want to do in the last few minutes of our time is I want to fast forward us all the way to the end of our lives. And I want us to experience the wisdom that we normally wouldn't gain until the end, until we look back over the life we've lived. There's a great book. It's called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. It's written by a woman who worked in palliative care, okay, hospice. And her job as a hospice nurse was to spend time with the people in their last 12 weeks of life. And over the course of her career, she tells us that she began asking one question to her patients. And here's the question. Do you have any regrets? And she would ask this question to every single patient over the decades of her service, and this pattern began to emerge. And she ended up compiling a very interesting list of regrets. But I want to spotlight one regret, just one, that people had in the last few days of their life. And in some cases, the last few hours of their life. Here's their regret. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. When I saw this, I was immediately reminded of something my grandfather would always tell me. He was a pastor for over 50 years, and he would always tell me, he would say, John, I never met anybody who on their deathbed said, I wish I worked more. Right? Like today, I wish I didn't just work 6 days, I wish I worked all 7. I want to read you a quote from this book. It's a little long, but it's just unbelievably convicting. Here's what she writes. This came from every male patient that I nursed. They missed their children's youth and their partner's companionship. Women also spoke of this regret, but as most were from an older generation, many of the female patients had not been breadwinners. But all of the men I nursed deeply regretted spending so much of their lives on the treadmill of a work existence. You know what this means? This means if we don't learn to number our days, we will die with an avoidable regret. Listen to me. If I lost you, come back in. Listen. The reason I pulled this quote for you is because of what I see, not just in this country, but what I see in this church. When I look at how we all work, when I look at how busy we all are with work, when I look at how we've become slaves to our emails and to our phones and to our careers, when I see what it is doing to us, when I see what it's doing to our mental health and to our marriages and maybe to our children and even to our relationship with God, what I see is a problem. See, when you think you have all the time in the world, when you think you got all the time in the world with your spouse, when you think you got all the time in your world with your kids, when you think you have all the time in the world to seek God and to respond to God, to thank God, to worship God, and to serve God, and then all of a sudden you realize you don't have all the time in the world. You can't get that time back. And so God, in the giving of the fourth commandment, is saying, I want you to pay attention to your days. I want you to remember to pause in order to reflect on the life and the time that I've given you. And I want you to start living life differently. So, what's practical? What do you do with a message like this? If it's your first time here, every single week at DHC, we put this word on the screen because we want to make sure you can leave on a Sunday and know exactly what to do with what you've heard. So today was all about this fourth commandment, this rule that no longer applies to Christians, but instead of just packing up our books and going home, we took a step back to realize how the fourth commandment can actually cause us to be more mindful of our time. It can challenge us to really rethink what we do with the limited gift of time that we all have. And so I have one question that I just want you to be praying about and meditating on this week, and it's this. What are you doing with your time? What are you doing with your life? Because as we saw today, according to Scripture, we are here today, gone tomorrow. So what are you doing with the precious gift of time that God has given you? Now, in answering this question, you might also have to ask yourself, well, what do I need to add to my life? Right? Do I need to spend more time with my children? Do I need to prioritize my marriage? Do you need to add gratitude into your life? How about this one? Do you need to add Jesus into your life? Now, here's the thing. You can't just keep adding things into your schedule. You know this because your schedule is already jam-packed as it is. So you're also going to have to prayerfully ask, what do I need to remove from my life? And this is a tough one. Because for some of you, you might have to put a name there. Because maybe there's a person in your life or people in your life who are stealing your life and you know it. Maybe for you, it might be a dead-end job and you just feel like you're wasting your days doing something you don't love. Maybe you need to remove worry from your life. Jesus said, worry won't add a single hour to your life. But for those of us in this room who worry, you know, it definitely removes hours from your life. One of my favorite songs is a song by a singer named Noah Kahn and a guy named Wesley Schultz. He's in the Lumineers. And you're not going to find this in an album. It's a single on Spotify. And you're going to have to excuse the title, but it's called If We Were Vampires. Okay, I know we should talk about vampires in church, but I did. Sue me. Don't sue me. It's an amazing song, okay? And if you want to go cry, go listen to this song. But there's a poignant moment in this song where he sings, what if time running out is a gift? I think he actually says maybe time running out is a gift. He says, what if knowing that this can't go on forever is a gift? Moses would say, it is. And if that's the case, then what do we need to do to rethink what we do with this gift of limited time? Let me pray for you.